Jeremy Jurgens, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum and also responsible for Center on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're gathered here in Dalian for our 15th annual meeting of the New Champions. And throughout our discussions at this meeting, AI has been in pretty much every discussion that we've had. This is a phenomenon that we've seen, whether it's in the popular press, following the stock markets, or in pretty much every casual conversation. There's a huge interest here. AI, the emergence of a general purpose technology, has broad strategic implications for business, for society, and the way we interact with one another. And this carries across all industries in all countries. And in this discussion, we want to look actually how AI is set to redefine industries, their business and operating models, and what implications it may have across media, pharmaceuticals, engineering, construction, other domains. Now, at the same time, there's also been a lot of risks that have been highlighted around AI. Some, the existential domain, what if we have a rogue AI, it runs away. Other things, that we already see taking place today, malicious utilization, deep fakes, disinformation, and then concerns, legitimate concerns around job losses, the need to reskill and have people adapt to these changes. Now, in the face of these challenges, it's really important to actually bring different leaders together, as we've done here in Dalian, and we do throughout the year, whether that's from business, government, civil society, academia, so we can have honest conversations about the implications, what they mean, and how we can actually navigate those challenges together. To this end, the forum has established an AI Governance Alliance, which today has over 300 companies involved, actively addressing these questions across 3 specific tracks. One on the technology and the safety side, a second on the transformation opportunity, and a third, importantly, around governance. And this discussion is part of those ongoing dialogues that we're having and feeds into it, and we'll be able to share a little bit of that here in today's discussion. Now, we have a specific working group with some of our members here on AI's role in the transformation of industries, where we take a comprehensive look of what it means to correct for what's already in place, as well as what might newly emerge there. And I think it's important to look as much of how AI will change infrastructure that's already in place, industrials that are already in place, along with what those new industries are that may emerge in this domain. And with this, we have a distinguished panel of guests with us. I'm with Warren Fernandez, CEO of Asia Pacific for Edelman Group, an American public relations and marketing firm. Vincent Henry Iswaratioso, from CEO of Dinh, Indonesian-based innovator in digital financial services. I have Samuele Ramadori, CEO of BrainBox, another innovator in the global energy transition space. I have Vu Van, the CEO of ELSA Corp, a US-based education language technology company. And last, I have Jay Lee, a distinguished professor and director of the Industrial AI Center at the University of Maryland. So having walked down to the end of the room, maybe Jay Lee, I'd like actually to start with you. And we've been having a discussion this week with a number of leaders. What are the economic sectors or industries that you feel stand to gain the most from using AI? And how do you see this impacting productivity and growth in the future?
Well, I would say in AI, let's first define the basic AI, right? 3 elements. A, algorithm, B is a big data, and C is computing. Then you have a verticals, manufacturing, semiconductor, energies, aerospace and transportation, medical, blah, blah, blah. So I would say the question, what's the most beneficial industry? In manufacturing industry, all kinds. That's what exactly WEF Lighthouse is about. You take different verticals industry, because industry has a baseline. You have a cost reduction. You have quality improvements, efficiency. So those are the baseline you have for the last 2 years. From last 2 years, last 3 years, then you apply this data analytics and to reduce downtime, predictive maintenance. So I would say in manufacturing industry, about a 30% of benefits in predictive maintenance. 20%, 15% probably in the quality improvements. And another 20% in operation optimization, scheduling, right, and improve efficiency, etc. So those are the big, very critical change the last number of years, I would say, regardless GAI exists, because the lighthouse started 2018. So it has been a very good 153 lighthouses, I would say, right? Number two area, I would say energy, because we talk about global energy issue. But if you look at the energy efficiency in wind turbine and wind energy in US, about 10%. But if you look at 10 years ago, the downtime of the wind turbine is between 5% to 7, sometimes even 10, depending on the size of the turbine, offshore. But today, less than 2%. That's good improvements. For offshore wind turbine, you're talking about 2%, and 5% reduction. There's a lot of energy you can generate. So again, that's another big piece. Of course, you go through a semiconductor, advanced, differently. If you talk about advanced semiconductor, then you're talking about yield improvement, how fast you can do that. You try and error, or you do systematic way. Oh, that's very, very important. So just a few, yeah.
Great, thank you, Jay Lee. You spoke to the predictive maintenance and also this role in energy. And McKinsey's estimated that value could be up to $25 trillion to the global economy. And I know, Samuele, you're actually working in these domains on the predictive elements, energy, and so on. Could you give us a little bit of a picture how you see this playing out? Where do these giant figures that we see come from? What's your perspective on this?
Sure. I mean, there's some really attractive opportunities with applying AI and the new tools at our fingertips. And anything with obviously very interconnected systems, and what that today have a lot of waste. In our case, we deal with commercial buildings around the world. That is a prime example of that. Another one would be international shipping and logistics. Just the way things are done today are frankly quite old school, and there is just a lot of room for improvements. So I'd kind of define it that anywhere that has obviously big impact, either dollars or energy consumed or materials consumed, that is in a very complex ecosystem, the opportunities there in a big way. Now, the challenge of getting there is the access to the data, and then also the access to allowing AI to make the improvements, whether it's kind of human delivered or autonomous. That also has to be the outcome. But that, unfortunately, in a lot of sectors, it is the case in our sector as well. You almost have to work just as hard making the AI work, new, novel technology, as you do making sure that you can find a way to connect to the data. And that's the reality of industry, right? This is not social media where the data's all there, anybody can access it. We're talking about plants and assets that move around and degrade, et cetera, et cetera. So there has to be that combination of access to the data and then making novel AI outcomes, quite powerful outcomes, make them work, trial, error, make them work, as you were saying, Jay. And so those two have to come together. And in many industries, I'd say there's a lot of work to be done before you're AI ready, like a lot. So.
Great, yeah. So let's hear from a couple of those industries. Maybe we could actually give us a picture of what this opportunity might look for. And maybe I'd start with you, Vivan, in the sense of, education. We're concerned around people. Let's keep people first in this discussion, role of education, skills, and so on. Could you paint a picture for us of what AI could potentially bring to the industry sector?
No, definitely. I think education is one of the earlier use cases that AI can quite be applied on broad cases. I think the biggest one, as we've seen already in the education space, is what we call it hyper-personalization learning. In education, that's basically the holy grail, because every single individual, depends on who you are, have a very different needs of learning. But traditionally, it has been extremely hard to offer a hyper-personalized learning path at scale for all of the learners. That goes from K-12 education, higher education, to training in a corporate setting, right? So for example, take corporate setting. It has been very hard for companies to even identify the areas of gap in skill set for employees to then offer a training solution and offer a generic blanket training solution for the entire team would be very costly and yet might not really address the skill gap. Same for school environment. And so with AI right now, especially with Gen AI, the ability for us to automatically generate content on the fly and the efficiency of it, allowing for the high personalization of learning to be extremely powerful. That's allowed for better student engagement, better learning outcome. It's allowing for the learning to be quite adaptive on the fly to each of the learner's ability. Each of us have a different way of progressing. Some of us take a lot longer to digest and learn the content. Some of us move a lot faster in certain domains. And so I think that's the biggest one that we currently see right now in education that has been, we're seeing a lot of applications and services and offerings that cater to that on multiple domains, from skill set to math to language learning to science and STEM learning as well. And I think the second one that we have also seen in education that's quite powerful in addition to that is what we call it conversational AI for learning. That's allowing for 24/7 support and instant feedback beyond the classroom. So traditionally, you rely on teachers to ask for questions and interaction. And up until recently, when generative AI with a massive amount of content, that has not been possible. You have to rely on asking the back and forth questions to a teacher when they are available. And previously, before generative AI become such an enabler right now, AI used to be quite static. It means that it will tell you a certain response, but you cannot ask back and push back on that one. Now, that ability to have a conversational AI that you can truly interact with, and it has no limit of knowledge, is extremely powerful because you can just ask about any topic, right? You can work in any domain, and you don't need to wait for another teacher to really train you that. And I think the combination of having a true virtual tutor or AI that understands you, where you are, what your gaps, what your needs are, understand your weaknesses, your learning style, and then the ability to interact on a 24/7 basis is really what will change the education landscape in the coming years.
Yeah, this idea of this personalized tutor that might be able to adapt to our needs, our opportunities. What's your estimate, if you'd be willing to make one? How far do you think we would be away from being able to actually see one of those tutors in place?
Well, we have already seen some tutors in place, and it's actually now the personalized tutor and the AI power is actually more powerful than a human teacher when it comes to the ability to learn. Now, it doesn't have the social emotional learning part of it that the teachers actually complement to an AI tutor, but when it comes to knowledge base and asking for information is quite powerful right now that we see. What we are seeing, the challenges with that personalized tutor, again, lack of that social, emotional, human intelligence, is that it doesn't catch up with the learner's learning style yet, right? Like, I believe in my science data, this is the path that you should be learning. Now, whether the student will take it or not is a different story, and that's where teachers still come in place, right? So can we truly replace human tutor and have a personalized tutor that actually works? I think that's a combination. I don't think we will ever do that in education, but I think there's certain elements that human teacher will never be able to do and personalized tutor is doing right now. I think the second part that's really challenging right now for a personalized tutor is education training curriculum can only be as good as the data that come into it. And data availability, as you said, is still a challenge because there's a lot of bias in the data that we collect right now, right? And so what's good for certain demographics, and especially in education, might not be relevant to others. And so it has to be extremely careful with that data bias that we currently see to make the personalized tutor truly work for us.
Great. So we have the tutors available today, not necessarily with the emotional level that we need. Good news for Professor Lee. There's still a role for educators in this process. So Vincent, maybe coming over to you. Sure. And you're in the financial services sector in Indonesia, and you're running a relatively lean company, in part because you're using AI. Could you share with us some of the innovations you already see shaping the sector, and then maybe give a little bit of an outlook of what you see emerging in the next couple of years there?
Sure. Can talk a bit about internally and also externally. think internally we've been adopting AI since quite a while ago, because before AI became such a catchphrase and everybody is talking that there are going to be AI first company, like basically everyone. We started about 3 years ago in a much more simpler term at the time, which is automation, right? And we started with RPA, robotic process automations, and we decided that it's going to be very important for our companies going forward because a lot of our processes are pretty much repeated almost every single time. There's some variations from here and there, but pretty much if you talk about financial services, a lot of the stuff that we are doing is just administrations. LLM comes in, and then suddenly it just becomes so much more easier for everyone to not only develop that internally for our people itself, but also to serve our customers. So when we started deploying that for our customer service, and we've seen a major improvement because if you do financial related product and services, there's definitely going to be some questions. There's going to be some error here to there because it's such a complex infrastructure and we have to be integrated to multiple parties. So when things happen, the customers are very demanding because it's related to, of course, their financial. Serving with humans, I would say, will not be fast enough or will not be scalable enough. So we started from the customer service. So when we started about 2 years ago, we had a bit over 1,000 people serving about 200, well, not at the time, it's about 50,000 of contact ratio daily. So 50 per one agent. Going forward now, we're serving about more than like 200 to 250,000 of contact ratio daily, and then now we're serving it using 350 human agents. 90% of our contact ratio now is entirely managed by automation and LLMs. I think, and that's just one indication of how successful and like automation and plus AI can help in terms of putting more efficiencies to your organizations. And we decided as well, we don't want to be, dehumanizing our companies itself. We decided that we're going to stop reducing the people, but instead we're going to focus on upscaling more and more of our people itself so that they can use and they can capitalize AI to become more productive. And now that has come across every divisions that we have in our companies, not just the customer service, in terms of development, programming, engineering people itself. For example, like close to 20% of our code now is generated by AI. In terms of product development, users, interface audit, user experience, now 40% of them, it's already audited by AI. And that goes along with our legal process, NDAs and stuff. Our NDAs now, we used to have 24 hours SLA. Now we're asking to be less than 10 minutes because we have learned so much and we have collected so much data that it can help improve or rewrite any sort of variations that possibly can do, because NDA is such a simple legal documents. Everything else is still manual.
Maybe I'd just like to come back on this aspect, legal and so on. So financial services is understandably one of the more heavily regulated sectors.
Yes.
And his application of machine learning AI, has it made it easier to navigate that? Or because of these unknowns that accompany it, is it actually brought more challenges? So how do you see navigating kind of understandably, strict regulatory environments with these AI tools?
So I think one of the key always challenge, there's just so many new regulations that being put in place, especially these days now, because the government, the regulators are trying to keep up so much with the innovations. So they do come out and this is a data itself spoken by one of our regulators. Every week there's a new regulation, every single week. And so for any one legal, like your legal team and your compliance team to keep up with it, manually, it's pretty much impossible. So I would say if you do that, almost every organization in the country would be in non-compliance. So you do need the AI LLM is helping you to make sure that every new regulations, every new government initiative or roadmap, it's one, being alerted, two, then your legal and compliance team have immediate access to what they're all about. So they can reflect whenever they have a new product in development, whether they have a new submission for compliance, or whether or not they have legal, they can benchmark and reflect that pretty quickly, as before it takes actually days or even weeks to comply.
Thank you for that. Now I'd like to maybe come to you, Warren. The media sector was maybe one of the first sectors and most heavily disrupted with the digital transformation. And you could argue that the media sector still hasn't recovered from that initial digital disruption and now seen another AI disruption taking place on top of the digital one. What are you even seeing today? I don't even think we need to look 3 to 5 years out in the future. What are you seeing actually today in media companies, and how are they navigating this both AI challenge and AI opportunity there?
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for having me on this panel discussion as well. I think the media and the communication sector is definitely sort of grappling with this, just as they've been dealing with digital and coming out of that. Now they've got this new technology. But if I take a few steps back, I think all of us in this room sense that this is quite a critical moment in the technology development. It's not some new tool, it's not some new software, it's really going to change the way we work, we operate, we think, and we live. And you can sense that from the response to, I think you've had about 10 AI sessions at the forum over the last few days, all very, very well attended. And it kind of reminds me of the moment that many of us must have lived through, in the 1990s, where we were first dialing to join the internet. You remember the crackling sound, the squeaky noises, and if you just think back then, what we could not have imagined was going to happen over the next decade and two to where we are today. And I think AI is at that point in its development as well. We cannot imagine where this is going at this point, and it's going to change the way we operate. For the communications and media sector, just as an experiment, I thought, why not consult the latest WizKit? So I put in a prompt and I asked Claude 3.5 Sonnet, what are the upsides and the downsides for the impact on media and communication? And it came up, almost instantly, 2 pages of response. Let me just summarize it for you. It says, on the upside, improve efficiency, enhance creativity, better language precision, data analysis and insights, personalization at scale, crisis management support, cost reduction. Downsides, job displacement, authenticity and ethics challenges, homogenization of content, privacy and data issues, so on and so forth. All pretty sound and sensible, but Clever Claude came up with this caveat, and I'll just quote it for you. It says, this outline provides a starting point for considering the potential impacts of AI on the comms and media industry. The actual effects will likely evolve as the technology advances and the industry adapts to the new tools. Now, translation into human language, it means you still need human input, human judgment, and human interpretation to watch how this develops. And that's the approach I think many communications organizations, including my own, we are taking towards this. I think to embrace it, to figure out when to use it and how to use it, and when not to use it, and when to make sure that you have human input, human oversight, and make sure we never lose that creativity and that originality. And I think one of the big challenges that every media organization, every communications organization is going to have to grapple with is this amazing paradox that with AI, you will have the ability to generate an infinite amount of content very quickly at very low cost. But the paradox is, as AI goes up, trust goes down. And the key question is, we may have infinite content, but we all do not have infinite attention, infinite time to engage. So we will be looking for a sense of who do we trust? Who can I rely on to give me good, credible, reliable information? And I think that's the next big challenge. Some of you may be familiar with a trust barometer report that we put out every year. And this year, we launched a report in Davos focused on innovation, and part of that was AI. And the interesting thing we noticed was that many people are questioning and skeptical about where AI is going to take us. Less so in Asia, because generally we've seen the benefits of innovation and technology. You just see all around China what impact it's had. But even in Asia, there's a sense that twice as many people feel that AI is not being well managed. And the worry is whether governments are able to keep up with this rapid change in technology. And if governments cannot do it, then is AI being pursued for some narrow profit motive or some political agenda? And is it being rolled out with the interest of someone like me? And when there is doubt about that or concerns about that, it leads to questions about should I be embracing this technology, impediments to the adoption of that technology. And even further, it leads to questions about whether the technology is being used in the interest of the broad sweep of society, and also questions about, is the system acting in my interest? So there are political implications there. So I think the technology is moving ahead so fast, and the challenge for all of us in this room is how do we ensure the communication of the value of this emerging technology so that we get the buy-in, we get the adoption, and we get the full benefit of this technology.
Great, thank you for that. Now, this isn't the first time that we've seen a panelist sharing what they had pulled in from a Bard or ChatGPT, Claude, and I could actually imagine we could have a French panelist from Mistral and just walk down the panel, and we'll be putting the panelists out of work pretty quickly there with these tools. Now, I think this is a legitimate question a lot of people are asking, and maybe Jaylee, I'd come back to you. What does reskilling, as we companies are rapidly embracing it, countries are taking different approaches. What does reskilling look like in the age of AI? And I'm also happy to hear from other panelists as well. But we were talking earlier about manufacturing workforces adapting, and those that are able to adapt actually can get massive benefits from it. But what does that mean for the average worker or employee?
Well, typically we talk about AI, right, in terms of technology, tools, and talents, right? If you treat AI as technology, but you need a tool to do day-to-day job, you need talent to be skillful to use the tools. So this is keep cycling, right? So eventually the human side. So depend on how we look at it, right? So you say, I want to replace human. Well, wait a minute. You want to replace a task, right? Oh yeah, the task. If you're not capable of the task, you'll be challenged. So we need to understand the gaps of how to perform a high quality, high consistent task. So eventually I would say in order to let people to know how to do it, they have to know what the weaknesses are. For example, I take too long to do things, or my job is inconsistent. So the AI help to first augment the intelligence. I help you do faster, better. So previously we had hourly worker comes in, take 1 week to train. Then we have augmented guided training, so they can self-train, self-learn, and one day, second day, they can get on the job, right? So that's good, right? They get confidence. But of course, then you need to keep them continue working. Then once they have done well, you want to move to automated intelligence. Help them to automatic check. So eventually synchronize, eventually autonomous intelligence. Then they can move on to different tasks, right? So I think the training people is very important. Normally we take 4 P steps. First is called principle-based training. Give you a little bit of background. What the AI is? Okay, yeah, you can self-learn. Second, practice-based learning. I give my baseline data set to you, the baseline task to you, you do it. You can make virtual mistakes. Fast, virtual mistake, right? Third, practice, the problem-based training. You go to your job, you physically use a tool, solve the problem to see how good you have done, compare with other people. Lastly, as the last one, is a professional training. You have to teach other people do 1, 2, 3. So by the time you fit like a mass black belt, right? Once you become a black belt, you have a confidence to train other people. So just train one person is not good enough. You have to train very fast speed and scale. You train many people, right? Then systematic, not try and error, systematic. The only thing we do that is because we want to make sure this is implementable, right? So AI also stands for actual implementation. Okay. If it's not implementable, AI is just another thing. Yeah.
Excellent. And we heard from Vu, we'll actually be able to use the AI tutors to actually help support or assist that training. We do have the opportunity to take questions from the audience. So if you have a question, do raise your hand. We'll have a mic. If we have any right now, I can take those. If you need a moment to prepare your question, we'll come back to you. I don't see any hands up. We have a very bright stage in a dark room. So I do see a hand up here in the front. If we could bring a mic up to the center of the second row. If you could identify yourself and also your question here. Third in there. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Melanie Mokidis. I'm from Amazon Web Services. I'm the head of healthcare technology. Thank you for all your insights. Clearly, AI is also bringing a lot of bias, hallucinations, toxicity, and other issues with regards to misinformation and disinformation. And I was wondering, based on your different inputs and perspectives, what do you think is the acceptable, if there is an acceptable threshold for bias in the results and the outcomes that it brings, and who should be deciding on that?
Okay, who'd like to take this one up? Samuele?
Well, in our field, I think there's less risk of bias. I was going to say, I think one thing we've experienced is we went from ChatGPT, where you could ask it anything under the sun and get an answer, and then you start risking elements of bias. You start getting to HR, and everything starts getting heavy. I think there's a lot of applications, and we've seen the technology come around now where if it's pointed to a certain direction with a limited data set, you can get some pretty powerful outcomes without that risk. But I mean, in our field, it's a bit less of an issue, but it still comes up when you start hitting those delicate areas. I think in your world, probably it's front and center.
Okay, that's right. We have a number of elections coming up, in the UK and France. A lot of people also looking forward to the US, as well as a number of elections taking place around the world. And this question of bias in the media is already present. And then how does it get exacerbated with these new tools and capabilities?
I think bias and neutrality has always been a challenge in any form of communication, and that's why you still need human input, human judgment. I think over time, as the machine learning gets better and better, you will narrow that field of bias. But the question goes back to the issue of trust. And there are various forms of bias, misinformation, false news, fake news. The Trust Project has 7 different categories of what false or bad information might be, just to separate them and help you deal with them. And you're right, we've seen misinformation playing out in the Indian elections, in the Indonesian elections, and we'll see what happens in France and the US. But I think it comes back to that ability to have a sense of how do we separate truth from fact? Because as the AI gets better and better at this, at lower and lower cost and faster speed, we will get to a point where we might not be able to trust what we see with our very own eyes. And then you have a challenge, right? If we can't agree on if this is black and if this is white, how then do we have meaningful discussions about policy, which is shades of gray? And I think that will be the challenge for all of us. And it's not just the media that has to grapple with it, it's society that has to grapple with it. In the past, if you go back in history, we are almost at the point where we were in the late 19th century, where information was put out with very little ability for newsrooms, professional journalists to interpret, to cross-check, to do investigative journalism, because there were no professional newsrooms at that point. The professional newsrooms of the kinds that we know today are really a 20th century phenomenon, and we've gone back to that. So how do we re-establish that ability to distinguish fact from fiction, from comment, from bias? I do think this is something societies will have to grapple with. And I used to work in the other web, the World Editors Forum, and this was an issue we grappled with at great length. The fundamental business model that funded good quality newsrooms is fundamentally broken. It's based on advertising revenue, paying for the journalism. That no longer applies. I think as societies, we are going to have to figure out ways of providing that good quality information, separating bias, separating false news. Just as universities are publicly funded, I think media might have to be publicly funded as well. That's one option.
Great. I think this question on bias is really important. So I'd like to maybe come to you one more time on this, because curriculum is another one of these areas that can be extremely contentious and debated. And when you think around, developing curriculums, you look at your peers also as they approach this. How do you approach this question of bias, especially when you start having, quote, personalized, education models? Well, personalizing which curriculum and on what basis, what framework?
No, it's definitely a big topic. Hallucination and bias is a big topic in education when we use AI, especially, and I think that's what I mentioned briefly at the beginning, is the bias in the data that come into the training model, right? And as we see the over-reliance on AI in education become a common thing very soon, it's the responsibility of all of the provider of the AI solution in the education space to really ensure the quality of our training model, right? And so just to answer your question, who's responsible for it? There's a lot of regulation and conversation about responsible AI and ethics in AI. But I think ultimately for any company that put out an AI model, we usually call it, within our community, we call it explainable AI. Can you really explain what's happening? And because historically, up until today, it's the dark box, right? It just, whatever the model spit out is whatever we take. And for curriculum training, it cannot be a dark box. It cannot be telling the students that just trust whatever we're putting out for you, but we cannot explain to you why you're learning it. And so explainable AI is extremely important for us. And the other thing is bias. For example, just a very particular example in our space, we build voice recognition technology, speech to text to speech, in order to help language learner improve communication. And one of the biases in the historical voice recognition model is that it's trained on the data of native speakers. It means that the big technology understands you when you speak really good English with the native accents. Now, there's the world of people speaking English in different ways and people speaking English less well. So when we started out the company, we actually spent a lot of time and resources in building a technology that's more inclusive in taking in different accented English, right? Right now, over the last almost 10 years, we probably have the biggest data set of accented English that we can understand people from around the world. And so I think as we open up the solution, it's important for us to be able to understand everything from people instead of being biased towards certain training data. So I think that's just an example, but I think ultimately it's all of us, and eventually that reskilling, right? The teachers or like the content provider are no longer content creator because GPT can write content so fast. But our job is then to become content validator. It's like to make sure that we catch all of the hallucination and the bias and retrain the model so that we can spit out the right thing for the learners in the future.
Great, thank you for that. I see another question here in the front. You can just bring the mic up there.
Thank you so much for the insights. My question was more around how we think about in a world of AI, what should be a public good versus a private good. Obviously, if you think about this conversation happening 100 years ago, people were talking about roads and that being important as a public good that gets provided by the government. So I'm wondering if there are conversations happening around, I think Singapore has thought about building a foundational model for the country. And as we think about sort of what should be certain aspects of the stack that should be government owned versus privately owned.
Would like to take that on, yeah? Sam?
I was just going to comment that the timing of that is interesting in our country, where Canada just had an allocation of dollars from the government to invest in compute, right? And the issue is, our sovereign compute was so small, and I think a lot of countries are facing that issue with the large hyperscalers providing service around the world. Europe, obviously, with the same dynamic, there's a very logical element as to why do that, why put public dollars into something that normally the private would supply. But at the same time, even if you go down that route, often the resources are what they are, and you may not achieve what you're looking for in the end anyways. And by the time you do put that compute in the ground, it'll be out of date within 2-3 years. So it's a bit of an issue there. There's also that same question around the actual foundation models. You double down on that question as well, and especially when you start applying those to public data, public goods, public resources. So that debate's happening live as we speak. I don't think we really know the answers. The problem is the technology is moving so fast, we're not even sure what we're trying to regulate or figure out. But that's another example of an area that's just you pray that the speed of the government is able to keep up with the changes that are happening. You pray.
Great, thanks. Maybe Vincent, I'd like to actually turn the same question to you. I know that in India we've seen both the Aadhaar program for a national digital identity, providing the foundation for Know Your Customer, and then building the UPI payments tool on top of that, and then providing it as a kind of a public infrastructure. Financial services is absolutely critical. How do you see this tension between public goods and private goods while still having sustainable business models to pay for the compute, to pay for the energy that needs to go in there?
I think this is a very important question, right? I mean, when we talk about the foundation technology, I don't think all of us and all countries in the world should invest in it, because at the end of the day, there's going to be certain foundation technology that we can use and capitalize. But I think the most important will be the knowledge base. I think in the future, knowledge base will be the key of the sustainability of any either country, organizations, institutions. So that's where we have to invest. And talking about that, and that's the danger as well on trying to democratize everything from the government side. So for example, in India, if you talk about Aadhaar and UPI, it's great for the public, but it's very difficult for the companies, because the companies actually doesn't own the data anymore. So for example, if there's any transactions happening now in the rail of UPI in India, when you talk about the concept of issuer, acquire, principal in the middle, so the company that issues the payment itself will only have the issuing data, and they will not get the acquiring data. And the company that does the acquisition, acquiring for the merchants, they will only get data from the merchant side without having the data from the user side. So there's always one-sided data, where the full data itself resides would be in Aadhaar or UPI. And so that gives, I would say, a weakness in terms of the knowledge base. And as a company, if you don't have the full set of data, then for you to be able to do any sort of product or profiling will be very difficult, right? For example, you want to create a credit scoring, then you have one half of the data. When you want to create a new set of whether on an insurance investment product, then you will only have partial of the data itself. So as a company, I believe that having that knowledge base will be the key. And second thing is how to make sure that knowledge base can be used to reach out to make sure to target the right users so that they can benefit from this knowledge base. And I think that would be some discussion that we need to also make sure that everybody understand, and especially talking to the government and regulators, that it's not just purely entirely democratizing without thinking about the long-term sustainability.
Okay. I maybe just want to challenge this a little bit, because we've also heard around concerns around over-aggregation of data, right? There's a concern that a few companies can actually end up having all of this data, and by providing it as a public infrastructure, you maybe actually force some of the companies to revisit their business models, to rethink it in a way that's more customer-centric. Now, I recognize, there's definitely advantages to that data aggregation, but potentially you can look at models of anonymizing data or so on. And so, how do you see that balancing also that tension, not only from the corporate needs, where there's clearly benefits on data aggregation, but also recognizing kind of citizen privileges, and even a kind of a tendency recently we've seen in many countries where people would like to have more control of their own data and keep it anonymized from various corporate actors?
Sure, I think we've discussed as well about privacy computing, what we call that, privacy enhancing technology. I think that would be a key technology that would help that. Because when you talk about, certain institutions hoarding all of the data, I think that's a concept where even the consumer or the users, the customers itself will have difficulty to access their own data, right? Because it's got hoarded by certain institutions. But if you talk about the concept of a standardization, open platform, and especially in regards to privacy enhancing technology, then every individual, every institution actually would have access to that data itself, even though they don't own it. So if we can deploy that kind of framework, and so essentially it's no longer also then the rules reside only in certain institutions, but then it's the ability of any of the participants in the ecosystem on how to process the data, on how well they process the data so that they can create solutions for the users. I think there's definitely encouraging, directions going there. I don't think it has yet been deployed massively in terms of the industry and especially the understanding, because if you talk to the financial institutions like the banks, the central banks, they're all very scared that the data is going to be taken by someone else. So they tend to have this hoarding mentality. But once you talk about all of this improvement, I think then everybody will understand now that it's kind of useless to hoard the data. It's just how can you process, how your knowledge base and your technology or your ability to process this data will be better or will be targeted compared to the other parties.
Great. Thank you. I think, Warren, you also want to jump on this.
I wanted to come back to the question that the gentleman asked about public and private sector. And I think there is an increasing sense that we need to see collaboration between the two, because this technology is moving so far and fast that the worry is that governments might not be able to keep up. Even in a place like Singapore, where the government is relatively organized, only 50% believe that the government is on top of regulating AI, let alone in other places. And the sense is that businesses seem to be having a responsibility to step up and engage and work with governments, and there's a big desire for more collaboration between the two. And I think it goes back to that issue of trust. And I think colleague, Speaker Wu was talking about explainable AI. The sense I think that our study showed was that people want to have a sense that they are being engaged and not being talked down to, by folks like us and telling them why this is good for them, but giving them a sense that this is technology that's actually going to benefit them and benefit someone like them and improve their lives. And the more they feel they have a stake in it, they have a sense of it, the greater the adoption. So there is a business interest here. The technology may be wonderful, but if you run up against human instinct to reject it, it's not going to take off. So as important as the innovation is the implementation. So I think that's where we've got to find ways to get business and government to work together, collaborate, so that we can get public buy-in to this technology.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
I was just going to comment too in terms of, like you're saying, the access to the data and engagement. I mean, we made a choice a few years back when we're collecting data that today is not collected. So we're accumulating this fresh set of data, and the smart business decision might have been just to use our own nomenclature and keep the walled garden up and so on and so forth. But we took a different approach, and I think a number of startups and scale-ups we're seeing are doing that. We're actually not just using some form of standard that's already out there, but even participating in the creation of the standard. We're improving it. And I think if we do that, we start hitting the trust element, we start hitting the collaboration of multiple people using the data for benefits that make sense to people. So I think that's a critical one. I wish I had some kind of barometer as to some percent of companies that are thinking that way, or are they keeping the walled garden going? But those walled gardens, I think, are a real issue. Like, I think it's the risk of crushing trust is very high.
Great. So something for our friends at Edelman with the trust barometer there, we can further pursue there. I'd like to come back to this aspect of productivity, but I do see a question in the audience, so we'll take the question there, and then I'd like to hear a little bit about productivity. But why don't we take the question here in the front of the audience?
Thank you. I would like to ask a less technical question.
And could you identify yourself as well, please?
Yes, I'm a Chinese from the petrochemical company. Okay, and we understand the United States are taking the leading role in terms of AI. As a Chinese, naturally we try to understand what's the gap between the China and the United States in terms of AI. Thank you.
Or is there a gap?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure there is a gap.
Yeah, that's why.
Great. Anybody like to take that up? Otherwise, I'll call on the people directly there. Yeah, Samuele, you're ready.
I don't want to deny. I've had that question asked probably 4 or 5 times in the last 2 days, and I came here trying to discover. I mean, here's the trust again. To me, it feels like there's a coming to China. There's a wall around China where we know there's a lot of AI work being done, but we don't really know what it is. I guess in the U.S. I would hope, maybe that's not going to be a fair comment. I think it's more public. We kind of know every 2 weeks it's going to be Google and then Apple, and they all take their turn launching the next LLM model, and so it's very marketed and promoted. But again, I don't want to pretend that we don't know everything that's being worked on. But from a Chinese perspective, we don't know from our side, sitting in Canada, but we do get the sense that the skill set and the talent pool and whatnot is very high. Now, okay, in this latest wave of generative AI, there might be an advance, a forward step with the US and a few European countries. But the perception from our side is that there's still quite an impressive innovation going on here. I don't know, you're closer to it.
Yeah, before I come to Jay Lee, I'd also maybe want to offer an observation. We talked about the bias earlier, and from what I've seen is there's clearly a bias is that English media is relatively widespread. And so people start to assume that only what I read in English media is taking place. And yet when you're actually discussing with people here in the Chinese media, they actually have a good view of what's taking place on both sides of that. There was even a case recently, I believe, with some young US researchers actually turning out that their model wasn't so novel, but they had borrowed it from Chinese researchers that had an open source project that was sufficiently open that they could take the work and try and pass it off as their own. But again, thanks to the internet, that was revealed relatively quickly. But Jay Lee.
Well, to echo some of the comments, the question I don't think that we should compute with good. I mean, you should, the ABC, right? Algorithm, big data, and computing. If you compare all of them, depending on how you look at it, I don't think no one's good. Okay? The big gaps are verticals. Your transportation, your energies, your manufacturing, your society, your skill. You have to be good in those areas. ABC good for me is no meaning. You got to have a purpose to use AI. Go back to the problem source. And then you find a process to solve the problems, to reach the purpose. Then you're good. Otherwise, to me, compare AI, there's no point. Right? So that's a very important point. So eventually, we need to rethink, to be humble. AI is not high tech. Right now, to me, it's a hot tech now. But we have to make AI become a handy tech. Then you can implement things. You want to be a winner, not be just a talker, right?
Good. Thank you for that. That's right. So you have the ABCs and actual implementation there. So I guess it looks different in China, actual implementation, the needs, the challenges, as it does in other countries there. Okay, 2 more questions, and then we'll have to begin wrapping up there. In the front row. Yeah, one more up there, yes.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. I'm Pei Lin from Caixin Media. Actually, back to like 20 years ago, when China entered the internet age, we used the same infrastructure, like we use the same database as the US. So we just develop applications on that. But in the age of AI, especially in generative AI, from the day one, we are decoupling. We are using a different set of foundation model and different set of computing power. So as maybe for you guys, you are doing applications layer. So for you, is that a problem for you? I mean, when you develop all these applications across countries, you need to use different infrastructures. So do you worry about that? Thank you.
Maybe I could direct that to Vincent.
Yeah, I can answer that. Definitely. So we do try multimodal LLM. So I think, and we experimented with a lot of them, even including the one in China as well. So at the end of the day, I think what Professor said is really relevant. It's what can give you the best result for what's your specific need. And I'll give an example for pretty technical example is compare, when in the US, because majority of people here must try the LLM of the US at least once. There's a difference between, for example, like a token contextual numbers from ChatGPT, OpenAI, compared to Gemini, Google, right? I mean, Gemini, Google can have from 1 million to 10 million, and ChatGPT is less than that. And then, of course, there's another one that, which is what Meta has is Llama, which is you need to have your own system to process that. So once again, right, every LLM or AI will have its own advantage, will have its own capabilities that